I used to think my name meant something in that house. Ruth Carter, daughter of Pastor Henry Carter and his wife Margaret. A family framed by stained glass and Sunday sermons full of phrases like blessings and God's plan. But when you're a child, you don't realize that some blessings are treated like burdens in disguise. Henry and Margaret adopted me when I was 3 months old. They already had a son, Daniel, and later had a daughter, Sarah. At church, they called me their little miracle, a story they told with soft smiles how they opened their home to a child in need. But behind closed doors, I was never quite theirs. I was something they had taken on, not someone they had welcomed in. Daniel had a nursery with cloud-painted walls. Mine was a corner room that used to be the laundry space. No window, just a small lamp that hummed when it stayed on too long. Sarah's bedspread matched her curtains and pink florals. Mine was a faded blanket someone left at the donation center. I never said anything. Gratitude was expected, and I was good at appearing grateful. Church folks adored the Carter family. Henry's sermons were polished. Margaret's potlucks always well received. Raising 3 kids with such grace. They'd say especially with Ruth's unique story. I didn't know what that meant for a long time. I thought maybe it meant I was special. Now I know it meant I came with a stain no one talked about. At school, when someone asked who my real parents were, I always answered, I have one mom and one dad like everyone else. But I knew not just in the legal sense, I felt it. Real love leaves fingerprints. It hangs your drawings on the fridge. It remembers what kind of cake you like on your birthday. It doesn't call you a spiritual test. One evening, I must have been 9, I overheard Henry praying out loud in the study. Lord, help me bear this responsibility you've given me. Strengthen my patience. Remind me why you chose her for us. I stood there invisible in the hallway, holding the empty dinner tray he'd asked me to clear. I remember wondering, was I a child or a chore? There weren't many pictures of me in the house. Margaret kept framed collages of Daniel's baseball games, Sarah's dance recital, even their pets. I once found a photo of myself tucked behind an expired insurance card in a drawer. I wasn't smiling. I looked like I had been told to. That was my place. Not quite hidden, but never displayed. By the time I turned 13, I'd learned how to disappear without leaving the room. That was useful in the Carter household, where visibility came with conditions, grades, achievements, obedience, and above all, silence. Daniel, a year younger than me, had shelves lined with Little League trophies and a framed certificate from a summer math camp. Sarah, 3 years younger, had dance medals, ribbons, even a glass case with her name etched on a silver plaque. Sarah Carter Jr., Miss Grace County 4. They both had door signs painted wood nailed in proudly. Mine was a sticky note once taped outside laundry do not slam. My room still smelled faintly of bleach. It had no doorbell chimes like the others. No sunlight that filtered in just right for Saturday morning reading. There was a drain in the corner floor rusted shut, and when it rained, you could hear the gutter water humming through the pipes above. I got used to the sound. It was better than hearing the laughter upstairs. On Sarah's 16th birthday, Margaret threw her a garden brunch. There were streamers and monogram napkins, a string quartet from the church youth group, and a hand-carved jewelry box with a silver bracelet inside her name engraved in cursive. Daniel had received the same 2 years earlier. That year, I got a Bible, the used kind, with dog-eared pages and notes in someone else's handwriting. Margaret had written on the inside cover, "Discipline builds character. We love you in Christ." I wasn't sure which part was supposed to comfort me. No one forgot my birthday. They just didn't celebrate it. At dinner, Henry would say, "Let's give thanks for the year Ruth's had and pray she continues to serve the Lord." Then we'd eat in silence. I always found it strange that a prayer could replace a cake. There was a time around age 15 when I baked my own. I followed a recipe from a torn page in a church newsletter, vanilla sponge with almond glaze. I waited all day, pretending not to notice the quiet, the lack of cards or candles. I lit a match and sang softly to myself. Sarah came in halfway through the song, laughed, and said, "You're so weird." That night, as I washed the dishes, I overheard Margaret on the phone. She was never really meant to be ours, but maybe God gave her to us so we'd learn patience. Then laughter, not cruel, just casual. I didn't cry. Instead, I wrote my name on the inside of the Bible cover. Not in cursive, just block letters, as if to say I'm still here. In church, they called me resilient. What they meant was, she doesn't talk back. Clara Thompson lived in the house next to ours. A retired nurse, widowed young, no children of her own. People at church called her Miss Clara with a kind of condescension reserved for older women who wore slacks and spoke their mind. But to me, she was something entirely different. Unhurried time. She first waved at me through the fence when I was maybe 10, carrying a plate of molasses cookies and asking if I liked birds. I did, but I didn't know much. So she taught me. Names, habits, migration paths. She had feeders hanging from her oak trees and a rocking chair on her back porch positioned just right for watching the finches come and go. After school, when Henry was at the church office and Margaret was out preparing for some bake sale, I'd sometimes sit with Clara. She never asked questions like, "How was school?" or "Did you pray today?" She asked, "What color was the sky at recess?" or "Did you learn something you didn't expect?" One spring afternoon, I helped her transplant tomato seedlings. My hands were covered in soil, my hair stuck to my forehead. Clara looked at me for a long second and said, "You know, sweetheart, some flowers bloom even when no one's watching. Doesn't make them any less real." She was the first person who ever framed a picture of me. I didn't even know she'd taken it snapped with an old disposable camera while I was laughing at a squirrel stealing strawberries from her garden. She gave it to me in a small wooden frame tied with twine. On the back, she'd written, "You are more than they see." I kept that frame hidden behind my pillow. At night, I'd hold it like a secret. Because in a world where I was constantly being measured against scripture, against Daniel, against what a good girl should be, Clara never measured me at all. She just saw me. She once said, "I don't know if God lives next door, but I'm pretty sure he'd rather spend his afternoons on this porch." I believed her. By the time I turned 28, I had learned to make peace with absence. Or at least I thought I had. I'd moved to a modest apartment 2 towns over, worked at the county library, and kept my world small, predictable, quiet mind. That year, Thanksgiving fell late in November. I remember the leaves had already lost most of their color, and the wind carried that brittle edge that makes you zip your coat just a little higher. I hadn't planned to do anything special. But then Clara called and said, "Why don't you cook this year? Invite them. Make the table yours." At first, I laughed. They haven't come to anything I've invited them to in the past 5 years. "But you'll know you tried," she said gently. "That matters too." So I cooked. I set the table with care iron stone plates from the thrift shop, cloth napkins folded into little triangles, cranberry sauce from scratch. I even bought a pre-lit garland for the windows and lit the pumpkin spice candle Clara had given me the year before. I sent the invitations 3 weeks in advance. Margaret responded with a single sentence. "Well, be hosting Daniel and Sarah at home that day." Sarah never replied. Henry, I assumed, would go wherever Margaret told him to. Still, I cooked. I roasted the turkey, basted it every 30 minutes, made herbed stuffing, and set out rolls wrapped in a linen towel. I placed 6 chairs around my table, 1 for each of them, 1 for Clara and 1 for me. The clock hit 2, then 3. The food began to cool. Clara texted that she'd been delayed at the doctor's, nothing serious, but she'd be a while. I stared at my phone for a long time, willing it to buzz with an apology or even an excuse. It never did. At 4:15, I sat down alone. I filled a plate as if they were watching. Turkey potatoes, cranberry 2 rolls. I placed it at the head of the table, Henry's usual seat, and then I filled mine. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just ate slowly, each bite tasteless under the weight of all the ones that had never come. The candle flickered beside the untouched wine glasses. My chair creaked when I leaned back. Clara arrived just before 5, bundled in her old navy coat, cheeks flushed. She took one look at the empty chairs and said nothing. Just gave me a small crumpled envelope. "I meant to give you this sooner," she said. "Been holding on to it for a long time. Thought it might matter today." Inside was a folded letter. and beneath it a bundle of similar ones all tied with a faded pink ribbon. "They're from someone named Lillian Clara," said softly. "They came every year. Your folks asked me to toss them." I didn't. The ribbon trembled in my hand. I looked at the name on the return address: Lillian Hayes, Chicago, Illinois. I had never heard that name before, but something inside me stood up. The ribbon was soft from time and fingertips. I untied it with care, as if the whole bundle might vanish if I pulled too hard. The top letter had yellowed slightly around the edges. The handwriting, elegant, slanted, steady, began with a name I had never heard spoken aloud. "Dear Ruth, I don't know if these will ever reach you, but I write every year just in case someone somewhere lets one through." The letter was dated on my birthday 12 years ago. The return address matched the name Clara had whispered Lillian Hayes, a stranger. And yet, with each sentence, her voice took root in places I hadn't known were empty. "You were born in a room with lilac wallpaper and morning sun. You had a quiet cry like you were waiting to see if it was safe to speak." She wrote about her pregnancy, scared young unmarried living with a strict Catholic aunt in Evanston who believed in penance more than compassion. Lillian had begged to keep me, but her aunt threatened to cut her off. The church had arrangements. She said good families, God-fearing people who would raise me right. They told me I'd get updates, maybe even pictures. But then silence. "I sent letters anyway every year on your birthday in case they let one through." I read the next, then the next. Each one built a year of my life I hadn't known existed in someone else's memory. When I turned 10, she wrote that she hoped I liked books. When I turned 15, she said she still imagined me with dark hair like hers. When I turned 21, she wrote that she sometimes stood outside playground fences just to remember how a child's laughter sounded. By the 6th letter, I stopped wiping my eyes. I let the tears fall silently as I turned each page. There were 14 letters in all. In the final one, dated 3 years ago, she'd written, "If you never read this, I'll understand. But I want you to know I never stopped being your mother. Not in my heart. I was just never allowed to be it out loud." Clara sat across from me the whole time, her hands folded, her face still. "They came to my door the day you were born," she said. "Said they were looking for a quiet neighborhood to raise their daughter." I didn't know the whole story until later. But when they asked me to burn those letters, she trailed off. I couldn't do it. I looked at the envelope again. The handwriting. The name, the truth I hadn't known to want. "I have to find her," I said. My voice didn't shake. It rang clear and full, as if spoken not just by me, but by the girl who never had birthday candles, the teen who sang alone, and the woman who'd set a table for ghosts. Clara nodded, reaching for my hand. "She never stopped writing," she said. That has to mean something. It did. I didn't call first. I wanted them to be unprepared. Margaret opened the door wearing a Thanksgiving apron in January. Her lipstick was fresh. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me. "Ruth, we weren't expecting." "I know," I said, stepping inside. The house hadn't changed. Same stiff-backed furniture, same portraits of Daniel and Sarah lining the hallway. Same absence of me. Henry appeared from the den holding a coffee mug that read "Near where one dad." He paused when he saw me, then sat it down without a word. "I found the letters," I said, "from Lillian." Silence. Margaret's hand clutched the edge of the counter. Henry blinked slowly like he hadn't heard me right. "Clara kept them. I added 14 in total, 1 every year." Henry looked at Margaret. She looked at the floor. "I came here for one reason," I said. "Not for apology, not for explanation, just to return the narrative." I placed the letters still tied with the faded pink ribbon on the table between us. I didn't untie them. I wasn't here to plead for recognition. You always told yourselves a story about how God gave you a burden to carry. About how I was some trial of patience, some moral assignment. Margaret opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You said I should be grateful for food, for shelter, for God's mercy. But not once in 28 years did you ever thank me for being the child who never asked why." Henry's jaw tightened. Still no words. I know who I am now, I continued. I am Lillian's daughter. I'm the girl who wrote her name in a used Bible and baked her own birthday cake. I'm the woman who waited 28 years to be seen and finally stopped needing it. I turned to leave. At the door, I paused. You could have let love grow here, but you chose control. And then I walked out. Outside, the air was cold but clear. Clara was waiting in her car, parked just down the block. She didn't ask how it went, just opened the passenger door and said, "You ready?" I nodded. "Chicago's a long way." She added, "I've waited longer?" I said. We drove in silence for a while, the letters resting between us like a passenger finally acknowledged. Chicago looked nothing like I remembered, not because I'd been there before, but because I'd imagined it so many times it had taken on a shape of its own. I expected something louder. Instead, I found stillness. Rows of old brownstones, narrow sidewalks littered with last week's leaves, a corner deli with hand-painted signs. Clara waited in the car while I stood at the gate. The apartment was on the second floor. Iron railing, chipped steps, a faded wreath still hanging on the door, though Christmas had long passed. I knocked once, then again when the door opened, it was her eyes that struck me first. Hazel, like mine. Her hair was pulled back in a loose twist, streaked with gray but dignified. Her hands, thin, steady, rested on the edge of the frame like she needed to hold on to something. "Yes," she asked, cautious. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. So I reached into my coat pocket and handed her the top letter, the first one she'd ever written. She looked at it, then at me. "Ruth," she whispered like she didn't believe her own voice. I nodded. Her hand went to her mouth, but the tears came before the words. She stepped back and opened the door wider, and I walked in. There were no dramatic hugs, no music swelling in the background, just the creak of old floorboards and the quiet sound of two lives rejoining at the seams. She made tea. I sat at her kitchen table, scarred, worn reel. She brought out a photo album I'd never seen, but somehow already knew. "This was you," she said, pointing to a sonogram taped inside the cover. "This is where you started." We talked until the tea went cold. She never asked about them. She only asked about me, what I liked to read, what made me laugh, what I dreamed of when I was little. And for the first time in my life, I answered. 1 year later, I set the table again. Same iron plates, same cloth napkins, washed and pressed. But this time, the table felt full, even before anyone sat down. Not because I expected it to be, because I had chosen who belonged there. Lillian brought sweet potatoes with cinnamon and nutmeg. Clara arrived with her usual molasses cookies still warm in the tin. A neighbor from my building came with homemade rolls, her little boy trailing behind her with a paper turkey he'd made in school. We didn't dress up. We didn't recite verses. No prayers were forced. And yet, somehow grace filled every corner of that small apartment. I didn't light candles for show. I lit them because the light felt earned. Lillian asked if she could say something before we ate. She stood slowly, glass in hand, her voice quiet but sure. I used to imagine what your first real Thanksgiving would look like. She set eyes on me. And I always pictured you at the head of the table, laughing loved-free. I didn't know what to say, so I reached for her hand and then Clara's, and the little boy reached across the table too, grabbing his mother's sleeve. That's how we sat, hands linked. No performance, no permission required. I looked around at the people gathered not by obligation, not out of duty, but because they wanted to be there. The turkey cooled, the pie cracked a little on the edges. None of it was perfect, but the table was mine. I kept the ribbon, not the letters, those I gave back to her where they belonged. But the ribbon, worn and soft, stays in my top drawer. I kept the framed photo Clara took, squirrel and all. It rests beside a new one, me and Lillian holding hands on the porch steps. And I kept my name, not the one they called when they needed obedience, the one Lillian wrote year after year, Ruth. With hope, with love. Some stories begin in silence. Mine began with a letter never meant to be read. Ruth Carter learns that her worth is not defined by the conditional love of the family that adopted her, but by her own resilience and the unconditional acceptance she finds in herself and others. Growing up in a home where she was treated as a burden rather than a daughter, Ruth internalizes a sense of invisibility, believing she must earn love through silence and obedience. The discovery of her biological mother Lillian's letters, preserved by her neighbor Clara, reveals a love that persisted despite years of separation, teaching Ruth that she was always seen and valued by someone even from afar. This revelation empowers her to confront the Carters not for their approval, but to reclaim her narrative and identity as Lillian's daughter. By choosing to build a new family with Lillian, Clara, and others who genuinely care, Ruth learns that love is not a transaction or a test, but a connection rooted in mutual recognition. Her journey from a lonely Thanksgiving table to one filled with chosen loved ones underscores her realization that true belonging comes from embracing her own story and those who honor it without conditions.
I'd learned to tune out Marcus's voice years ago. My older brother had perfected the art of dismissal by the time I was 12, standing in our childhood kitchen while he mocked my science fair project about bacteria growth patterns. "That's adorable, Emma," he'd said, ruffling my hair like I was a particularly dim puppy. "Maybe stick to something simpler. Like coloring books." 20 years later, his tone hadn't changed. Just the setting. Now we were at my parents' house for Thanksgiving, the familiar dining room filled with the scent of roasted turkey and simmering resentment. Marcus sat at the head of the table, Dad's right hand, the golden child, the one who'd gotten his bachelor's degree in business from a state school and somehow parlayed it into a middle management position he never stopped talking about. "So, Emma," Marcus said, cutting into his turkey with the precision of a surgeon performing his 1,000th routine procedure. "Still taking those classes?" I looked up from my plate. "I'm finishing my dissertation, actually." Right. He waved his fork dismissively. "The PhD thing. How long has that been now?" 7 years. 8, I said evenly. Mom set down her wine glass with a soft clink. "Honey, don't you think it might be time to consider something more practical? Your cousin Jennifer just got her real estate license. She's doing very well." "I'm sure she is," I replied. "Because this academic thing," Dad interjected, "it's not really a career, is it? I mean, when are you actually going to start making money?" "You're 32 years old, Emma." Marcus leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Come on, guys. Let's be supportive. Emma's going to be Dr. Williams someday. Doctor of, what was it again? Molecular biology? That's adorable." "Biochemistry and cellular biology," I corrected quietly, "with a focus on targeted protein degradation mechanisms in oncology." "See?" Marcus gestured at me with his fork. "Nobody even knows what that means. That's the problem with all this academic stuff. It's just word salad. You're hiding behind complicated language because there's nothing actually there." My younger sister, Claire, looked uncomfortable. She was the middle child, the one who'd become a nurse and therefore occupied a strange middle ground in the family hierarchy, respectable enough to avoid Dad's disappointment, but not successful enough to warrant Marcus's jealousy. "Emma's work is probably really important," she offered weakly. "Important?" Marcus laughed. "To who? Other people playing scientist in their little university bubbles? Meanwhile, I'm out here in the real world, managing a team of 15 people, making actual contributions to the economy." "You're an assistant regional manager at a logistics company," I said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "I'm sorry." Marcus's smile had frozen on his face. "I'm just clarifying," I said calmly. "You said you manage 15 people. I was clarifying your position." Dad's face reddened. "Emma, your brother works very hard at a respectable job. Not everyone needs to hide in a classroom forever, playing with test tubes and pretending they're going to cure cancer or something." The irony wasn't lost on me, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd learned that skill over years of family dinners like this one. Years of being the disappointment, the one who'd wasted her 20s in graduate school while Marcus climbed the corporate ladder and Claire got married and had 2 kids. "Speaking of cancer," Mom said, clearly trying to redirect the conversation, "did you hear about Martha's daughter? Stage 2 breast cancer. Only 35 years old. It's just terrible." "Horrible," Marcus agreed. "That's real life, you know. Real problems that actual doctors deal with. Not sitting around theorizing about proteins or whatever." I took a sip of water. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. The thing is, Emma, Dad continued, we're just worried about you. This PhD program, it's been nearly a decade. Don't you think it might be time to admit that maybe this isn't your calling? There's no shame in changing direction. You could go back to school, get a teaching certificate, become a high school science teacher. That's respectable. Or real estate, Mom added. Jennifer really is doing wonderfully. Marcus leaned forward, his voice taking on that particular tone of false concern that he'd perfected over the years. Look, I'm going to be honest with you because someone needs to say it. This whole academic thing, it's escapism. You're hiding from the real world because you're afraid you can't make it out here. And I get it, I do. Not everyone is cut out for professional success. But you're not a kid anymore, Emma. At some point you need to face reality. What reality is that? I asked. That you're not research material. You're not going to be some groundbreaking scientist. You're not going to cure diseases or win a Nobel Prize or whatever fantasy you've been chasing. You're a decent student who went to community college. I went to community college for 2 years to save money, I interrupted quietly. Then I transferred to Cornell. And now you're trying to pretend you're in the same league as people who went to real universities their whole lives. People who actually have the intellectual capacity for high-level research. My phone buzzed again. And again. Claire shifted uncomfortably. Marcus, that's a little harsh. It's honest, he cut her off. And Emma needs to hear it. How much debt are you in, Emma? How much have you borrowed for this degree that's never going to lead anywhere? I have a full scholarship, I said. Plus a research stipend. Oh wow. A stipend. Marcus laughed. What's that, like 20,000 a year? I make 6 figures, Emma. 6 figures. Because I live in the real world and made real choices. Dad nodded approvingly. Your brother has a point. There's dignity in honest work. In practical careers. This obsession with being some kind of elite intellectual. It's not healthy. And frankly, it's not realistic for someone with your background. My background, I repeated. You know what I mean, Dad said uncomfortably. You were never the academic type. You were always more average. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with being average. But this pretending to be something you're not. My phone started ringing. Oh, for heaven's sake, Mom said. Can't you silence that thing? We're having family time. I pulled out my phone. The screen showed an incoming call from a Cambridge, Massachusetts number. I recognized it immediately. I'd been staring at it for months, waiting, hoping. I need to take this, I said, standing. Of course you do, Marcus said. Can't let your fantasy world wait. I walked into the kitchen, my heart pounding. Hello. Dr. Williams? This is Dr. Patricia Chin, director of the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard. I apologize for calling on the holiday, but we've just received the final approval from the patent office, and I wanted to be the first to congratulate you personally. My hand tightened on the phone. The patent was approved? Not just approved, Dr. Williams. Fast-tracked. The preliminary valuations are coming in at $2.8 billion. Your targeted protein degradation platform for solid tumor cancers. Emma, you've revolutionized the field. We're already fielding calls from major pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer wants an exclusive licensing deal. So does Merck. The NIH is calling this the most significant breakthrough in oncology in 30 years. I leaned against the kitchen counter, my legs suddenly unsteady. Dr. Williams? Are you there? I'm here, I managed. I know this is overwhelming. Which is why I'm calling personally. We'd like to offer you a full professorship, not assistant, full professor, and your own research institute. The university is prepared to invest $50 million in startup funding for your lab. You'd have complete autonomy, your pick of postdocs and graduate students, and a salary of, well, we can discuss specifics, but I think you'll be very pleased. From the dining room, I could hear Marcus's voice. She's probably talking to one of her little academic friends, comparing notes on their imaginary research. Dr. Williams, Dr. Chin continued, I realize this is sudden. But your work on selective protein degradation using novel molecular glues, it's going to save lives. Hundreds of thousands of lives. Maybe millions. The clinical trial data you've generated is extraordinary. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer patients showing complete remission. Glioblastoma tumors disappearing. This isn't just a breakthrough. This is a paradigm shift. When do you need an answer? I asked quietly. Take the weekend to think about it. But Emma, and I hope you don't mind me using your first name, I've been in this field for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. You're going to be the youngest person to receive the Lasker Award. Potentially the Nobel. The scientific community is already buzzing. Your paper drops in Nature next week and it's going to change everything. I closed my eyes. Thank you, Dr. Chin. No, Dr. Williams. Thank you. On behalf of every cancer patient and their families, thank you. I ended the call and stood in the kitchen for a long moment staring at my phone. The congratulatory emails were already flooding in. Harvard, Stanford, Memorial Sloan Kettering, the Mayo Clinic. Every major research institution in the world, it seemed, had gotten word of the patent approval. When I walked back into the dining room, Marcus was mid-sentence, playing pretend in a laboratory somewhere, mixing chemicals and calling it research. It's honestly embarrassing. I have colleagues who ask me what my sister does, and I have to explain that she's a professional student who... He stopped when he saw my face. Everything okay? Claire asked carefully. I sat down and placed my phone face down on the table. That was Dr. Patricia Chen from the Broad Institute at MIT and Harvard. The what institute? Mom asked. One of the world's leading biomedical research centers, I said. She was calling to inform me that my patent application was approved today. Marcus snorted. A patent? For what? A new way to waste taxpayer money on targeted protein degradation for solid tumor cancers, I continued evenly. The preliminary valuation is $2.8 billion. Several pharmaceutical companies are already bidding for exclusive licensing rights. The room went very, very quiet. Dad set down his fork slowly. 2.8 billion? The technology allows for selective degradation of cancer-causing proteins that were previously considered undruggable. Early clinical trials are showing complete remission in stage 4 pancreatic cancer, glioblastoma, triple-negative breast cancer, and several other previously terminal diagnoses. Marcus's face had gone pale. That's not. Dr. Chen also offered me a full professorship at Harvard Medical School, along with my own research institute and $50 million in startup funding for my lab. Mom's wine glass slipped from her fingers, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. My paper is being published in Nature next week, I continued in the same calm tone. Dr. Chen mentioned something about the Lasker Award. Possibly the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, though that's obviously speculation at this point. Claire was staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Emma, you're going to cure cancer? Not cure, I corrected. But significantly improve treatment outcomes for solid tumor cancers that currently have very poor prognosis. The 5-year survival rate for pancreatic cancer is currently around 11%. In our trials, we're seeing 92% complete remission after 18 months of treatment. Dad's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. But, you went to community college. For 2 years. Then Cornell for undergrad summa cum laude. Then Harvard for my PhD. I've been working in Dr. James Patterson's lab for the past 6 years. He won the Nobel in 2019. I was his lead researcher on the project that earned him that prize, but my name wasn't on the paper because I was still a graduate student. This work, my patent, is independent of his research. Marcus found his voice, though it came out strangled. You're making this up. You're lying. I picked up my phone and pulled up the email from the patent office. I turned it around so everyone could see. Application approved. Patent number US 11,234,567 assigned to Emma Catherine Williams. Current valuation estimate, $2.8 billion, subject to licensing negotiations. I scrolled to the next email. This is from Pfizer's VP of Oncology Research. They're offering $400 million upfront for exclusive licensing rights, plus royalties. Merck is offering $450 million. Johnson & Johnson came in at $380 million with a higher royalty structure. $400 million, Mom whispered. That's just the upfront licensing fee from one company. The patent is valued at $2.8 billion because the market potential over the next 20 years is estimated at $50 to $75 billion annually once the treatment platform is fully developed and approved for multiple cancer types. I scrolled further. This is from MIT's Office of the President. This is from Harvard Medical School's dean. This is from the director of the National Cancer Institute. This is from the Nobel Assembly at the Karolinska Institute. Apparently my work is already being discussed for next year's prize, though obviously nothing is confirmed. Marcus stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. This isn't real. You're not a real scientist. Yes, Emma. You're the one who couldn't even get into a real university without starting at community college. You're the one who's been playing in a laboratory for 8 years while I've been building a real career. Managing 15 people at a logistics company, I said quietly. For $103,000 a year according to what you mentioned at Claire's birthday. That's a respectable salary, Marcus. You should be proud of it. His face flushed red. Don't you dare. The licensing deal I'm likely to accept will pay me a $400 million signing bonus, plus 8% royalties on all future revenue. Conservative estimates put my personal earnings over the next decade at approximately $4 to $6 billion. After taxes, I'll probably keep around half of that. Dad looked like he might be having a heart attack. Billion. With AB. I'll also receive the full professorship salary, around $300,000 annually, which is honestly negligible compared to the patent revenue, but it comes with the research autonomy I want. The institute they're building for me will have a $50 million initial budget, expanding to around $100 to $150 million per year once we're fully operational. Claire was crying. I wasn't sure if it was from shock or something else. Do you remember Martha's daughter? I asked Mom gently. The one you mentioned with breast cancer? If it's triple-negative breast cancer, and statistically that's likely given her age, my treatment could save her life. That's why I do this work. Not for the money. Not for the accolades. For Martha's daughter and the millions of other people who get diagnosed with terminal cancer every year. Marcus sat back down heavily. I don't understand. How did we not know? Because you never asked, I said simply. For 8 years, every time we had a family dinner, you made jokes about my little academic hobby and my pretend research. You never once asked what I was actually working on. What my research was. What results I was getting. You just assumed that because I started at community college because I wasn't flashy or corporate or making 6 figures right out of school, that I must be failing. But you never said anything, Mom protested weakly. You never told us you were working on something so important. I tried. 3 years ago at Christmas I mentioned that my early trial results were promising. Dad said I was getting ahead of myself, and suggested I consider getting a teaching certificate instead. 2 years ago at Easter, I mentioned that Nature had reached out about publishing my preliminary findings. Marcus said academic publications were meaningless circle jerks and that real success happened in the business world. I stood up suddenly exhausted. Last year at Thanksgiving, exactly 1 year ago today, I tried to explain what targeted protein degradation was. You all stopped listening after 30 seconds. Marcus said I was trying too hard to sound smart, and that I should stick to community college level thinking. The silence in the room was deafening. The truth is, I continued, you didn't want to know. Because knowing would have required you to reconsider your entire narrative about who I am. It was easier to believe I was the family failure, the disappointment, the one who couldn't hack it in the real world. It justified your own choices. It made Marcus feel better about his middle management position. It made Dad feel vindicated for pushing me toward practical careers. It gave Mom something to worry about and fix. I picked up my phone as it buzzed again. Another congratulatory email, this one from Stanford's president. I need to go, I said. Dr. Chen wants to schedule a meeting with MIT and Harvard's leadership tomorrow to discuss the specifics of the offer. I have a flight to Boston at 6 a.m. Tomorrow. Mom said. But it's Thanksgiving weekend. We were going to have leftovers and talk about how I'm wasting my life. I asked not unkindly. How I need to be more like Marcus. How I should get a real job. Nobody answered. I grabbed my coat from the hallway closet. Claire followed me to the door. Emma, she said quietly. I'm sorry. I should have stuck up for you more. I should have asked about your work. It's okay, I said and meant it. Claire had her own struggles with this family. She'd chosen nursing specifically because it was respectable enough to avoid Dad's disappointment but not ambitious enough to trigger Marcus's jealousy. She'd played it safe her whole life. Can I ask you something? she said. Of course. When Marcus was going on and on about his management position and his six-figure salary, did you already know? About the patent approval. I paused at the door. I've known the patent was likely to be approved for about 6 months. The valuation estimates have been floating around for 3 months. Dr. Chen's offer has been on the table, pending patent approval for 2 months. So you just sat there. Through all of it. Knowing. I've been sitting through it for 8 years, Claire. What's one more dinner? She hugged me suddenly, fiercely. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I don't understand what you do, but I'm proud of you. I hugged her back. Thank you. As I drove away from my parents' house, my phone rang again. This time it was Dr. James Patterson, my former advisor, the Nobel laureate. Emma. I just heard. Congratulations, don't even begin to cover it. This is extraordinary work. Truly extraordinary. Thank you, Dr. Patterson. I have to ask, and please don't take this the wrong way, but why didn't you publish sooner? You've had viable results for over a year. You could have published in Nature last year and gotten the same recognition. I smiled even though he couldn't see it. I wanted to be sure. I wanted the clinical trial data to be absolutely bulletproof. I wanted every possible criticism addressed before publication. That's the mark of a true scientist, he said warmly. Though I suspect there might be another reason. I didn't answer. Your family, perhaps? The ones who never quite understood what you were doing. Maybe, I admitted. Emma, you don't owe them a dramatic revelation. You don't owe them anything. I know. But maybe I owed it to myself. To know absolutely that I'd succeeded on my own terms. Not on theirs. Not according to their definition of success. On mine. He was quiet for a moment. You're going to do remarkable things, Dr. Williams. This is just the beginning. After we hung up, I drove in silence for a while, processing everything. My phone continued to buzz with congratulatory messages, interview requests, collaboration proposals. Stanford. Cambridge. The Mayo Clinic. Memorial Sloan Kettering. Every major cancer research institution in the world wanted to work with me. But all I could think about was Marcus's face when he realized. When the reality of it finally broke through his carefully constructed narrative. When he understood that his little sister, the one he'd been mocking for 8 years, the one he'd dismissed as a perpetual student, the one who'd started at community college, had just revolutionized cancer treatment. And more than that, when he realized that I'd known. That I'd sat through his condescension and Dad's disappointment and Mom's worry, knowing exactly what I'd achieved and chosen to say nothing. Because nothing I said would have mattered. Because they wouldn't have believed me anyway. Because the only thing that would ever make them understand was external validation from someone they considered an authority. My phone rang again. Another Cambridge number. Dr. Williams? This is Catherine Walsh from the Nobel Foundation. I'm calling on behalf of the Assembly. I pulled over to the side of the road to take the call. Behind me, in my parents' dining room, I imagined the conversation that must be happening. Marcus scrambling to Google my name and finding it everywhere. Nature, Science, the New England Journal of Medicine, the New York Times Science section. Dad trying to reconcile the daughter he'd dismissed with the woman the world's leading institutions were calling a revolutionary scientist. Mom, wondering how she'd missed it, how her daughter had been working on something this important and she'd never noticed. But I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. And ready to get back to work. Because in the end, that's what mattered. Not Marcus's validation. Not Dad's approval. Not Mom's understanding. The work mattered. The cancer patients who would live because of my research. They mattered. Everything else was just noise. Dr. Williams? Catherine Walsh said. The Assembly would like to schedule a preliminary review meeting for next month. This is highly unusual, but given the significance of your breakthrough and the clinical trial results, we believe there's sufficient justification to expedite the process. I took a deep breath. I'd be honored. As I drove toward the airport, my phone lit up one final time. A text from Claire. Dad just looked you up. He's having a panic attack. Mom is crying. Marcus locked himself in the bathroom. Emma, what do I do? I thought about it for a moment, then typed back. Nothing. Let them process it. I'll call you next week. Then I turned off my phone and drove into the night toward Boston, toward my new life, toward the research that actually mattered. Behind me, my family was finally understanding what I'd tried to tell them for 8 years. But I was already moving forward. Because that's what scientists do. We keep moving forward. Always.